going to go through our panel today. I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes to sort of introduce themselves, the organization that you represent, and what one takeaway was from this summer's flooding as it pertains to your work and your. Can you start with Urffer from Connecticut River Conservancy?
I was expecting one.
You're right in the middle.
All right. Hey, me first. I win. Kathy Urffer, Connecticut River Conservancy. So Connecticut River Conservancy is the advocacy organization that works to protect and restore essentially the Connecticut River watershed in all 4 states. So we work in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and the state of Connecticut. I am the river steward in Vermont, so really a focus on the eastern half of Vermont in our work. And our work covers a lot of different kinds of things. So we do policy work, we do direct advocacy where we're commenting on, permits and things like that. We do on-the-ground restoration work with landowners. We do outreach and education and community engagement, and we try to get people on the rivers as well, so recreation as well. As part of our advocacy work, we also do a lot of hydro relicensing work. So one of our big jobs right now that for me is the relicensing of the Wilder, Bellows Falls, and Vernon dams, and we've been working on that project for 12 years. And what was the question? Takeaway?
One takeaway from the flooding events this summer.
I think my takeaway, I feel like since Irene in our restoration shop, I feel like we've been racing time because we do, small dam removals, unused, we call them deadbeat dams, those that are not being used. We do floodplain restoration projects. We help plant riparian buffers along streams, and all of those things are the type of natural resource projects that will protect us in floods and also provide habitat and, clean the water. But every time we do a project, up until this July, it literally has felt like a race. Like, how many of these can we get done? How quickly before the next big storm? And so, I think my takeaway is like, more, faster, keep going, and hoping that the legislature this year will help us direct more funding to the type of natural resource management projects so we can quickly move more of them along.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from David Deen from Trout Unlimited of the Connecticut River Valley.
Good evening. Thanks for coming. Nice to see people interested in protecting the waters of our state. Trout Unlimited is a national organization, but it's organized on a statewide basis, and the states are organized into chapters. There are 5 chapters here in the state of Vermont, and the entire state has an active chapter that covers the geography of that area. Everybody's volunteer. There is no staff. There is no overhead. It's all volunteer. I happen to be chair of our chapter. It runs out of my office in my home, and when we get donations, they go into my shed. Anybody has any spare space, I'm interested. But for an all-volunteer organization, and it's something that we talked about last night, the council gets together once a month via Zoom call. And we have 99 schools here in the state of Vermont who have trout in the classroom programs in the elementary schools. And we are really proud. We're about to start off. Our next fundraising campaign is going to be entitled Make It 100. And we'll be looking for as much raffle income and donations. Because if you don't start with education, if you don't start with the kids, by the time they get to our age, they have maybe bad habits ingrained. And so we think trout in the classroom is an important way to go. Key issues, protecting riparian areas. We get involved with legislative initiatives to do that, as well as doing hands-on work. planting trees in conjunction with CRC and other organizations. We do electrofishing to working with the U.S. Forest Service, whose land has most of the A1 streams, top quality streams in the state of Vermont, to check to see what their fish populations are. And then we do others on our own in conjunction with Vermont Fish and Wildlife. We raise money, and we raise it for things like Trout in the classroom. That program exists in the schools because we buy the $700 chiller that needs to go into the tank to raise the trout from young'uns up until they are released into a stream, a local stream. We also make money available for dam removals as partners too. Connecticut River Conservancy, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And we do that through what is called the Embrace a Stream program, which is a national TU program, again, available to all of the TU chapters around the country, and to the 5 chapters here in Vermont. I have a list of partners, and I'm sure I've left some out, so I'm not going to, you can't name an organization concerned about water that TU has not worked with. And as an example, the chair of our state council, made up of the 5 local chapters, is an attorney and a lobbyist for the Lake Champlain Committee, and watches the Lake Champlain issues as they come into the legislature. Some of us with past histories with the legislature watch what happens to the Connecticut River initiatives also. And I'll end with just one thing. In terms of initiatives, we are working along with the Connecticut River Conservancy on the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership Act, which will affect and potentially help the Connecticut River in all 4 of the watershed states. It's being led by the Friends of Conting, and it is modeled after a program that operated here in the Upper Valley, thank you to Senator Patrick Leahy, back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And what it does is it makes grants, key grants, to make sure that it leverages additional monies from various sources to do specific hands-on projects. So we've taken a model that was created. I'm gesturing to Jason. He serves on the Connecticut River Joint Commission. We've taken that model and we are now talking about it on a 4-state basis. And as an example of working in partnership, you never know who your partners are going to be.
Thank you, David. Just a reminder for panelists, we're going to try to do intros 2 minutes. I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for the community members to ask questions, share their stories, so that we've got plenty of questions to also ask the panelists later in the evening if we have time. Next, from the Black River Action Team, Kelly Stettner.
Thank you. So I'm Kelly Stettner. I founded and direct the Black River Action Team. I live and work in Springfield, Vermont. And BRAT is an all-volunteer group built right up from the grassroots, and it wouldn't be anything without volunteers. What we did during the flood was mostly cleanup. If you ever saw people walking around with mud puppy shirts on or toting, buckets and shovels, that a lot of those were our volunteers. So a huge thanks out to 2 volunteers in particular, Melissa Rockhill and Lori Marsho. The 2 of them, with their knowledge base and their experience base, we were able to handle over 400 volunteers over the course of about, we just did a cleanup this past weekend, so I can't even we're still going, let's put it that way. But many, many, many projects, well over 80 projects of cleanups, all kinds of different venues. So cleanups are the biggest thing that we do. We also work on invasive plant management, native tree and shrub plantings for riparian buffers to try to help with stormwater management and try to protect our rivers, but also protect our infrastructure. Water quality monitoring, a lot of citizen science projects that we do, again, as volunteers. And I think my biggest takeaway from this whole thing has been probably two-pronged. It's been the grassroots community members, just everybody coming together was so inspiring to me. There's so much power at the grassroots, it's incredible. And the other portion for me would be that people are starting to be very willing to consider that our economy is married with our ecology, and that there are ways that we can rethink how we live along our rivers that benefits not just the river, but us. And our way of life and what we need to survive. So the marriage of economy and ecology is really my big takeaway from this year's events. So thank you.
Thanks, Dailey. From the Vermont River Conservancy, Hayley Kolding.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I work for the Vermont River Conservancy, which operates statewide to protect and restore and connect Vermont's rivers. And you might know us through our beautiful swimming holes and fishing holes. We maintain some paddlers' campsites. But really, flood resilience has become a huge part of our work. And that's partly because river science has advanced so much in Vermont in the last couple decades. So we work with the Department of Environmental Conservation and are able to identify priority areas for protection along our rivers and in our floodplains. One of the main tools that we use is the conservation easement, which is a perpetual legal protection on the river, the floodplain, and their natural processes. So we work with communities to make sure that the rivers and floodplains in their land will be protected as that land changes hand over generations. During the floods of this summer, we were keeping a pretty close eye on those sites. We were checking in with farmers and with homeowners, and we were asking, like, did it do its job? This land that you chose to conserve with us, is it doing something for us? And the good news is that the answer was yes. We did have a lot of landowners reaching out and telling us that where they've chosen to preserve that floodplain and to allow riparian buffers to grow and to thrive, they were seeing the river slow down. They were seeing it spread out. They were seeing it trap sediment, and that was taking the brunt off of communities along the same rivers. That's the good takeaway, right? Like this method works and it helps. On the flip side of the coin, there's so many opportunities for conservation that we need the capacity to make happen. So we know how urgent this work is, and we know how helpful it is. We also know that we continue to depend on funding for our partners at the state, like the DEC and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, to make sure that we have the technical expertise, right, but we also need the funding to continue conserving this land and continue stewarding it.
Thanks, Hayley. Next from the Vermont DEC, Marie Caduto and Shannon Pytlik.
Hi, I'm Marie Levette Caduto. I'm with the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation, Water Investment Division, Watershed Planning Program, typical government. My job is watershed planning. I'm the planner for this region. I cover basically everything from Killington down to Vernon, all the rivers that flow to the Connecticut River, basically everything south of the White River. And I'll talk about it in a little more detail, but my job is basically to find what needs to get done on the landscape and try to get it done. Things that protect our water quality, rivers, lakes, streams, ponds. And if I have one main takeaway, I worked, this area, and including Ludlow, through Irene, through the July floods a few years ago, through this one. If there's one thing I take away from all of this, it's that we're in a relationship with our rivers that needs to change. Right? No matter what we would like No matter how much we would like it to stay the same and have the river where the river's always been and how the river has always behaved, it's not gonna happen. And if we keep fighting it, the river, the climate is gonna win. You know, we can't fight it, it's gonna win. So we need to figure out how we adapt to that. What do we do going forward to provide those floodplains, to make sure what happens in Ludlow doesn't happen every time we get a heavy rain? We have to change our relationship and figure out how to go forward.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shannon Pytlik. I'm the river scientist with the Agency of Natural Resources, DEC, Watershed Management Division, Rivers Program. And I oversee the assessments and river corridor planning efforts for my region of the state. We provide technical assistance for floodplain restoration projects. And I also oversee statewide the River Corridor Easement Program, which is where we work with our partners like the Vermont River Conservancy and the Vermont Land Trust to conserve floodplain assets, to try to take some of the pressure off of downstream communities, as well as provide storage for floodwater and sediment. And if I had one takeaway from this flood and the Irene flood, which I was also here for, I would say I would totally agree that we need to increase our capacity of what we can do and somehow, stage up all of that work that we've been doing to another level. But also that we can't manage our way out of this problem. We really need to start finding out where we can avoid putting investments within our floodplains and river corridors, where we can restore floodplains and compensate landowners for the lost productivity of that land, and where we can retrofit, existing developments within our communities to try to make it so that the next flood is not quite as bad, because I think, if there's one thing that's for sure is that flooding is going to happen again. We just don't know exactly when. So the more we can prepare for it, the better.
Great. And finally, we'll hear from Karina Dailey from Vermont Natural Resources Council.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to see everyone in person and be here. It's my first time in the auditorium. I'm the restoration ecologist for Vermont Natural Resources Council. And Vermont Natural Resources Council is a statewide environmental advocacy organization. Our office is in Montpelier, but we work across the state on environmental policy related to clean water, connected forests, community housing, sustainable communities and affordable housing, and climate resilience and energy. So, and this is the third of 3 different forums. Our goal has been to target these flood-prone areas, the areas that were hard hit during the storm, and come and have conversations with you guys about the river and the water. So, and as in my work at Vermont Natural Resources Council, I work in the water policy world, so I work on water policy, and I also work on the ground implementing, reconnecting rivers and removing derelict dams. So I manage something called the Vermont Dam Task Force, which is a convening group of scientists and community citizens and other environmental organizations focused on dam removal. And so I'm here in that capacity as well. So it's really fun to be able to do things on the ground, like all of these folks, and then actually work that into policy at the State House. As far as my takeaway from the flood event, I think the biggest thing is giving the river room to move. Like we saw what the river did. The rivers need room to move, and they change, like Marie said. And the rivers will always win, like they are gonna win. So we need to give them that space to move. And we need to think about the river not just as the river flowing through your backyard, but where it started up in the mountains and the headwaters and the wetlands and springs and the tributaries that fed the main stem of that river, and then where that river goes and where it ends up, whether it's the Atlantic Ocean or Lake Champlain. So we need to think of the river at the watershed scale, so thinking about the water in all of those capacities. So that's what I'll share for now.
Great. So now for the folks in the audience, you now have been introduced to our panel. You know who's here, and we'd love to hear from you. We do have Okemo Valley Television recording, and we would love for you to step up to the microphone. I know that can be intimidating for folks, but just so that we can capture what you have to say. Any questions, stories, ideas, etc. We would love to answer any questions that you have about watershed health in your area. If anything's on your mind, now is the time for you to contribute. Great. And if you don't mind introducing yourself so that we know who you are and where you live.
Hayley Messing, Ludlow. Marie, I heard you speak in Plymouth on Monday, and you were talking about the Muddy Brook. And is that what's causing the lakes right now to have all that silt in it? Echo, rescue. Okay. Is any thoughts how that will clean up? Well, because right after the flood, it was really bad, but it started to settle again. And then I guess about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it got muddy again. Do we any expert advice on how long that will take? Is the water safe for? I mean, now we're at the end of the season, but if it were still able to go in the water, is it safe? Is there bacteria?
I'll start where you started. As
Okay.
far as Money Brook is a small tributary upstream on the Black River here in Plymouth. And Money Brook is one of the problems that is contributing to the cloudiness of the lakes. So Amherst, Echo, and Rescue are all part of the Black River. The Black River, they're just the river, wide sections of the river. And Money Brook is definitely one of the contributors of massive amounts of sediment. It's got a landslide up the stream that's literally 1,000 feet long and 250 feet high. And there's nothing that we can do to fix that. You know, that's got to go through the natural process of stabilizing. It would cost, I can't even predict how much it would cost to try to fix something like that. But there's also the rest of the upper Black River. And there's all kinds of sediment sources farther up that are also contributing to the sediment that reaches the lakes. And, you know, because they're on river lakes, they're the sediment basins. That's where the water slows, just like when the river comes down to the floodplain and the water spreads out and the sediment settles out. The lakes are the same thing. The water comes down the river and the water spreads out, it slows down, and that's where the sediment ends up. I think after Irene, it probably took, a year and a half before the lakes really cleared up. And it's probably going to be something similar. Because that sediment the fine sediments are going to continue to come in with every rainstorm, and with, you know, spring runoff. So to say that, you know, you'll be fine in a year, I certainly can't guarantee that. It's going to keep on coming, and until, you know, we were trying to address the sediment sources from other tributaries. We've done work on Buffalo Brook, which comes into Amherst. We've done work on Patch Brook, which goes into Rescue. You know, we're trying to deal with the sediment sources that are at a scale we can do something about. And we'll continue to do that. And we're always looking for input from folks who are on the landscape and know where these sources are coming from, to let us know, so we know where to focus and we know what projects to do. But as what we've done at Money Brook, which I mentioned on Monday, is through the River Conservancy, we preserved the wetland, which was a farm field, at the base of the brook. So now when it comes slamming down that ridiculously steep brook and it hits the flats, where that water spreads out has a river corridor easement on it, and that has allowed that wetland to come back. And when you look at the aerial photograph of that same location after this flood, there's a lot of vegetation and a lot of sediment got trapped in that wetland. That's what we need to be doing all through the landscape, so that each one of those, even though it might not be a massive wetland restoration, each one of those slows the water down, accumulates sediment, and if we have them all through the river, then we have a chance, right, to lessen the water that's hitting downtown Ludlow, and lessen the sediment that's hitting the lakes. So we need that participation from landowners along the river to say, I'm willing to let that field go back to a wetland or become a floodplain so that it provides that services to everybody along the river. So if you got a wetland or a field, let me know.
Thank you. Great.
My name is Margot Caulfield, and I'm from Cavendish, and I work both Irene and Kelly is my most trusted soul in the world. How many times do we talk daily, Kelly?
I don't keep track.
Yeah. And Kelly and I have talked about this idea of culverts. Just as we have Green Up Day to people in the state, we need a culvert day because it's not going to solve some of the big ones, but it would have certainly helped in our town if culverts were cleaned out. Culvert crawlers, whatever. But if we can do Green Up Day, championed by the state with lots of information, we certainly could have a culvert cleanup day. Second of all, we need money for home remediation. How do we help these homeowners? Because every one of our homeowners is just as vulnerable today as they were on July 9th. That water's going to come. What can we do to reduce the impact on their homes? There's no money for this. So we're really good at preparing for what we've experienced. We're lousy preparing for what possibly might come. So while 6 feet might have been okay for Irene, it was not okay for this storm. And that needs to be addressed. And we really, really need money to help these homeowners do what they can at whatever level to mitigate. Because all we've done, okay, so you've given them money for mechanicals and maybe they've moved up, but that doesn't mean that their basement isn't going to flood again, that the foundations of the houses aren't going to be weakened. And the last thing is that town managers and towns are very reluctant for buyouts. And we have to address that because that takes away tax revenue. And they never again can use that. We just saw in Ludlow, 2 properties have been approved for buyout, 2 have been denied. In my own town, I know where there should be buyouts, but that's not going to happen. Where are we going to move these people? So, it's all well and good to say, well, if you have farmland, do a wetland, whatever. But there's a real issue of where people go, and does the buyout even begin to pay for them to relocate and stay in our communities? So it's a little pie in the sky. So I've given you some things that we can realistically and sort of easily do. But the other ones are going to be the deal changers. And understand that we spend the largest part of our taxes on education. And our towns have been sacrificed year after year because we can fudge. Give the town manager less, make them pay for health insurance, do that. We'll do without a highway person. But the schools get the lion's share of the money. And we all saw what happened because our towns were really vulnerable because we didn't have necessarily always the infrastructure we should have had for this rebuild. And now we're going to be hit with loans to pay for this, bonds, whatever, and the education keeps on going. That all has to be looked at. So.
Any responses from the panelists on that? Deen?
May I ask a question? How much money would a homeowner or should a homeowner get? I mean, how do you quantify that? And you need not answer now. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. But I was in a conversation first thing this morning about resiliency, rural resiliency, and what we had been talking about did not affect the homeowners. And since that conversation everybody else, businesses, municipalities, infrastructure, all of that was on the table and of concern, but not individual homes. Since then, I've had a thought, what about if we invested money as we have with our weatherization program to ensure that people are efficiently heating their homes, that we see that they efficiently affect the rivers of Vermont? Just think about it.
The weatherization, I think we all had hoped, we all were waiting for Efficiency Vermont. We held off distributing funds that we had received. We've all had high hopes for Efficiency Vermont, and in our area it hasn't really worked that well. Most people have not had time to wait. So they also did not have the upfront money that you have to give. That program has not worked for us.
You know, with the weatherization program is a very different model than what you're describing with Efficiency Vermont.
Efficiency Vermont has two programs. They have one that
I'm talking about the community action agencies.
oh, yeah, well, good luck getting them to come out here. That's been a huge problem. We have one home, they were told they wouldn't get there until sometime late in December, and they're in a trailer, they can't wait. So the community just stepped up, and volunteers are going and doing it.
Good.
Yeah, no, it's not necessarily good, because we don't necessarily know if those volunteers know what they're doing, but people are just jumping in, trying to do what they can do and asking questions later. You know, we should have had a better model statewide. We should have been prepared for this, and we weren't. We should learn from Irene, we did not. Mechanicals should not be in the basements of houses. That's a tough lesson, because in New England, we put the mechanicals in the basement. We have to rethink basements. You know, and I'm taking this slightly in a different direction than where you are, and I'm fully on board with River Conservancy, but I've also been on the other side of this of talking about the basements and being there and understanding that these homeowners are as vulnerable from this river today as they were on July 9th. And I also am aware, like we were just talking, who happened to be from my community, what they did to take care of a culvert. Well, they probably helped prevent real damage. What if we did that statewide? What would that impact be? Just a thought.
I just wanted to add to that, as far as retrofits are concerned, those are hard to fund, but FEMA does put a certain amount of the funding that goes towards hazard disasters, towards mitigation projects. And I know FEMA's difficult, you know, it takes a really long time. It's not necessarily an efficient process, but I am aware of at least a lot of community buildings being retrofitted with like floodgates in the basement on the windows, and, you know, certain mitigation actions that are moving you know, furnaces and things upstairs. So there, you know, that's the only funding that I am aware of. But I think, you know, I have seen that be successful in some instances.
Anyone else have anything to add or questions? Pearson?
My name is John Ellison. I'm the state representative for Weathersfield, Cavendish, and Baltimore, and I'm also a commissioner on the flood control compacts. We share office space with you folks. This question is directed towards ANR. West of the Green Mountains, the 3-acre impervious soil rules, is there any impetus to try to institute that rule on the east side of it? And if so, I question the, for lack of a better word, the severity, the cost versus benefit. I can see a parking lot, a paved parking lot, being considered a lot different than a gravel parking lot, but yet that particular rule seems to treat them both the same. So it's a two-part question. Is there any push to get it on our side of the state? And is there any review of the cost versus benefit?
It's not really my area of expertise. But.
So the 3-acre rule, so if you have 3 acres on one particular parcel that is impervious, in the Lake Champlain watershed and the Lake Memphremagog watershed, you have to deal with the stormwater runoff from there. It's a stormwater permit that's needed and retrofits that need to be made to prevent stormwater runoff. and to treat the runoff so it's not bringing pollutants, in that case, into those two lakes, which are under EPA regulation. We don't have that total maximum daily load requirement on the Connecticut River or the Hudson. Bennington is the Hudson River, but it is coming. It's either 33 or 38, so it's way out there for the Connecticut River. But we will be impacted by the 3-acre rule eventually. That's how it was designed. That's what the legislature put into place at that time. Because they were working on Lake Champlain phosphorus issues, they started it there. The second part of your question, tarred versus gravel. So when we work on a gravel road, we use like hard pack, we pack it down so the water doesn't penetrate. A gravel road or a gravel parking lot acts exactly the same way as a paved parking lot, because we build them that way so that they won't get mushy and mud season-y, and so the water can't get through them. So in fact, they are pretty basically impervious, and that's why they're treated the same way. Gravel roads are the same way. We consider those to be impervious surfaces. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to add that the hydraulically connected roads, money and rules have done wonders saving roads.
Thank you.
It's a lot of money. It looks like the tickets, but it really is saving the roads, saving all that gravel being washed off in farmers' fields and eventually finding its way into the rivers.
Thank you for saying that. The agency gets a lot of kickback on the fact that why are, these ditches are ugly and why are we putting these in? But I live on Caper Hill Road. It's got one of those hill names in it. And the side of the road in July, the side of the road that they did the ditching was perfectly fine. The side of the road that they didn't do the ditching was a 2-foot gully, and it works. Whether it looks good or not, it's working, and it's saving towns huge amounts of money because they're not going back after every storm and rebuilding the road. So thank you.
My name's Charlie James. I got a little issue going on. I've got I planted my whole little brook in the back of the house, which is only like probably 30-40 feet to the brook. Trickling brook most of the year. Of course, it overflowed. Right on the corner of my lot and the neighbors, it came over right there. So we had to redo the yard, topsoil, scrape out all the debris that was in the yard. Well, I got one area that seems to be an issue with the town. Since my neighbor has complained, it's on the borderline. I planted a lot of evergreen trees. I put them very close together for privacy and some other reasons with the neighbor. But now the town, she has complained to the town so much, now the town has sent me saying I may build a berm, which I had no intentions of doing. I would have put the dirt around each evergreen tree, but I ended up putting them very close together, so it made one type of a mound, which they're calling a berm, which they sent me a letter saying I was in violation because they hold a 50 feet setback from the river. I had no idea I was doing this, so I don't really know what my resolution is. I did appeal it, and I have a meeting next week, whether I trench it out to make individual mounds or I'm less than a half acre. I don't know if I'm exempt from it. Really don't know which way to go with this one particular area.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'd want to see the letter to understand exactly what they're concerned about, but sometimes that can be considered fill in the floodplain. So the whole idea of the floodplain is to leave it open so that it can convey water, and when we build a berm along the channel, it can prevent the river from, flooding the floodplain, and that ends up containing more water in the channel, which can then, flood your adjacent neighbors and
My
downstream
house,
properties.
Yeah, and my house built it right
In
up.
your house.
My
So-
neighbors never had any issues. My house is a,
So they might just want you
every
to
time it
move,
floods, Irene and all the floods.
they might just, maybe we can follow up, I can call you tomorrow or something, because they might just want you to move the pile somewhere else.
Well, it's just like the tree line.
Along the river?
No,
Oh,
adjacent to the house, but they're called, I do have some other trees on the river, but they're called all, all existing. Everything was existing there, but it's where I planted the new trees, and I didn't put them in single mounds.
so do you know if it's a map floodplain where the fill is?
You're saying, yeah, they adopted a flood
Yeah.
thing.
So
back
it's
in
probably
two-
just no fill can be there, whether it's in piles or whether it's spread in a long berm.
So that means I remove the trees?
No,
But trees?
not
they
the
won't.
trees, but I guess maybe I would need to see a picture and understand exactly like what you're talking about, but,
But one of my things I was gonna approach them is that I channeled out between the trees, so it wouldn't be called a berm anymore. The water would be able to flow through there. But leaving the trees, putting the trees in was to absorb water.
the trees went in after
evergreens.
the berm, so they're like on top of the berm?
Well, I can't go down too
Yeah.
much because it's all clay,
Okay.
hard packed clay. So yeah, there's
Okay.
mounds of dirt, which a lot of people plant their trees that way. And then my intentions was to plant a tree and mound it with dirt, but they got so close together, I ended up one mound for all the trees. So now, would I approach them by carving that out in between there and make this go away?
I think we'd have to like come out and maybe do a site visit and look at that site specifically to give you a recommendation to that. But I think it's probably what they're, the
I
letter,
mean,
I'm assuming it's
I don't want
considered-
to really remove the trees. The trees are there for a purpose.
Right, I wonder if we can remove the fill and plant the trees like lower down in the ground so that it's not fill, so that it's like level with what the floodplain is mapped at. Because the issue is that the floodplain is mapped at a certain elevation, and that's where,
Well, it's the same elevation as my yard, but yes, they're mound up around the trees, so, because it was all hard packed clay under there,
right.
so I had to mound them up.
Yeah, we can
but-
probably come out and look at it and provide you some advice.
Okay, so what do I get your number, or?
I can give you my number after the meeting, maybe?
Okay,
that
sounds
okay?
good, thank you.
Sure.
May I respond as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that you told that story, because I think that sometimes the process of trying to do better with our yards is really daunting. And, your example is showing us, like, you tried to do something that would help the river, and it led to this extra hassle, and you're wondering, what do I do next? I think for a lot of people, that would have been a barrier, so they wouldn't have even tried to make it better. But I would encourage people to reach out and get some technical support and advice. When you have that moment, when you think, I would really like to have a buffer on my brook, or I would really like to soak up some of this water, your local conservation districts often have technical assistance that they can offer, other local watershed or river partner groups. So reaching out and getting that support, because it can feel daunting at first, but it's also so important that landowners are trying to manage their brooks and their vegetation in really healthy ways.
And we can sometimes find the money to pay for it.
That would be good if I gotta do some more, kind of exhausted, all the funds getting this done.
On that note, I'm going to pivot to some questions that we have pre-written for the panelists, and if you've got more questions afterwards and we still have time, obviously, feel free to ask them or try to snag one of these folks before you head out. But Kathy, for community members eager to contribute to river protection, as we were just saying, what opportunities can you suggest for people to actively participate in efforts to protect and restore our rivers and riparian areas in order to help combat climate change?
There's a lot in that question, so there's a lot of ways to answer that. I guess the way that I'll answer that question is really to sort of explain our restoration work and how we work, because I think that's one of the ways. we are often working with landowners like yourself, right, who maybe want to do something to help the river, or have some land that's flooding, or have a bank where they're losing land to the river because of erosion. And like the conservation districts, we are able to often work with that landowner where we can sort of project manage a whole restoration project on their site, right? And so that can look different depending on the landowner and what the site is, but often it would be, there are pots of money, various pots of money, some federal pots of money, some state pots of money, some private pots of money that can be used for this sort of restoration effort, these types of restoration efforts, whether that's planting a buffer or a stream bank stabilization or what have you. And for our part, we work with the landowner to try to identify what it is they want to do, what would work for them, what would be permittable, if we needed permits, and then we help identify grant funds to do a design, if a design is necessary for whatever it may be, and then also implement the project. And in some cases that means we're contracting with people with big yellow machines to come and dig out dirt. That means, we're identifying trees to plant. So it's generally can be a multi-year project where we help the landowner essentially manage the whole thing. And similarly, the conservation districts do it. VNRC does that for dam removals. So we have a lot of partners where, if we don't have the resources to do it, we can suggest maybe another organization that can help take care of it. But what we're finding, and especially in the face of climate change, is there are more pots of money coming to be able to do these type of projects. And sometime the pot of money may be attached to aquatic organism passage, right? Like it's really about getting the fish to pass. Sometimes it may be about habitat. We have a grant right now that we're managing that's really focused on identifying areas to protect wood turtle, right? And projects to protect wood turtle. Sometimes it's about clean water. So we can sort of sometimes cobble them together to help landowners do some of those projects. So that's one example. In all cases, for this work to be done in the state, any of this resiliency work, we need a willing landowner. Always, right? It really, whether that landowner is the town or private citizens, this work will only happen with people who own land stepping up to say, yeah, let's try to do this on my property and see, how that can help. Oftentimes, it can help you, but it's also going to help your neighbors downstream. And, we have some landowners with a lot of property that if something is done on their property, it can be incredibly beneficial to maybe an area downstream where the population center is a little more concentrated and there's more people. So, which is sort of, harkens back to what I think Karina said about making the connection between the headwaters and where the river flows and who it hits next, because sometimes the solutions for where you're at may be upstream of you in finding places for the water to go, or slow down at least,
Building on that, Hayley, can you describe a few current projects or initiatives that the Vermont River Conservancy is currently undertaking to address river conservation and restoration? Any examples of this work that has helped or that will help in the future?
Yeah, thank you. Well, going to what Kathy and Karina have both reiterated, rivers need room to move. So a lot of our ongoing projects are protecting rivers and floodplains in priority areas for accepting those floodwaters and sediments, and for allowing the river to move within its corridor over time. It's shifting back and forth. Sometimes that looks like loss of land and erosion, but when we provide that space, it's preventing the brunt of damage elsewhere, and it's actually allowing a healthy and dynamic system. So we often are partnering with DEC on those easements. But we also are involved in restoration projects that range from very passive to very active methods. An example of passive restoration would be working with landowners and saying, you know what, we're actually going to stop disturbing soil and stop disturbing vegetation in this buffer reaching back from the top of the riverbank. And by removing our disturbance from that area, we're going to allow it to revegetate naturally. And as it revegetates, it's going to be more stable. It's going to be able to soak up more floodwaters, and it's going to be able to store more sediment. That's pretty passive. You sit back, you protect it, and you wait. Leaning more actively, we might go in and plant some riparian buffer species. We might do trees for streams projects. We could take a card out of the beavers book and do some strategic woody additions or process-based restoration. We might, in the case of certain major hazard mitigation programs, actually be going in there and doing serious earthwork. If anyone's been down to Brattleboro recently, there's this industrial site on the Whetstone Brook that used to be a lumber yard. And in order to keep that land high and dry, the previous owners put in just massive amounts of gravel fill. So what we saw was that during Hurricane Irene and during this summer, that floodplain site didn't flood. Instead, the river was confined and it moved with incredible force into the downtown and caused catastrophic damage. So a very active restoration approach that we're involved in there is taking out that artificial fill, leveling out the floodplain more to a natural elevation, and giving the room back to the river so that it can spread out and it can slow down. And in projects like that, we're seeing benefits for communities downstream, not in the order of inches of flood reduction, but feet of flood reduction. So those are really important ways to improve our safety by, again, rethinking that relationship that we have with development along rivers.
Thanks. I want to pivot to Kelly. The Black River Action Team focuses on local clean water and cleanup efforts. Can you highlight some of the recent community-based initiatives here locally that have made a notable difference on the Black River?
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
Sure thing. Yeah, the Black River Action Team focuses on local clean water and cleanup efforts. Can you highlight some of the recent community-based initiatives or projects that have made a notable change here in the Black River?
Oh boy, I would say that probably in addition to the cleanups that we're able to do and the coming together of the Mud Puppy group, the Mud Puppy crew, it felt like there was a dynamic that began with that group that just spread into not just Ludlow, but Cavendish, Proctorsville, Mount Holly, and just started to connect homeowners, landowners, second homeowners, business owners, and the conversations around stormwater and what to do next, what's the smart move next. Not just on their landscape, but also in their homes. People are starting to look into having their homes raised and elevated. And as Margot pointed out, having some of their mechanicals brought up to the ground floor. Just rethinking our relationship with the river. Where are we going to put the sports field? Where should we put, not just the Little League field, but where should we put various recreational resources? Other things beyond just the flood. Let's see, we've had a good response from the communities with projects like invasive plant management. We've been working on Phragmites on the shoreline of Amherst Lake for several years. And every time I do that, it's a couple times a year, and every time it's a different group of volunteers who shows up. So the information gets out there about what this plant is, why we'd kind of like to get rid of it, and some simple mechanical, methodical, repetitive procedures to managing this plant and how we're going to help the shoreline recover after we've removed it. What are we going to do next? A lot of next step thinking has been coming out of recent projects that we've been doing. I had a note on here. There was something else I wanted to mention. Oh, that would be, right across from the it's not the Glimmerstone Mansion, but the nice stone house before that. That was several years ago. That was right after Irene. Sarah Stoll and her daughter came out to help do some planting there of native trees and shrubs. And we came through right after, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks after the July flooding, and a lot of the evergreen stuff that's at the top of that is still there. And that's something I'll be talking with Marie about, going back in there once I make contact with the homeowner, to see if we can't do like round 2 of that and get more of that planted in, maybe with some root wad infrastructure, soft infrastructure, and just try to keep protecting that so that that soil doesn't then motivate downstream and fill in, what's downstream of that, the Cavendish, the nice wetland there at the top of Cavendish Gorge, and that a lot of that stream bank in that whole field is protected and stays put, and maybe the river comes up, maybe the river spreads out, slows down, but it doesn't take a big chunk of that property down. It didn't cross 131, no. So it does work, and it's, we're never going to stop the next flood, but if we can try to lessen the impact by looking upstream, looking uphill, try to make small corrections up in these headwater streams, I think we can make a big difference. So.
And I'll tout Kelly's other work that she does every year and has been doing every year forever, is run a water quality monitoring program and pulls together volunteers who go out every other week and pull samples out of the Black and some of the tributaries and feeds all that data to the state. So we know, because we can't monitor all the waters in the state with, the 5 or 6 people in our monitoring department. And so volunteer groups, which is here is BRAT, does a huge service to the state and to everybody by keeping us aware of where the water quality is what. And river sweep and going down and doing the river cleanups. So Kelly does a lot more than she is giving herself credit for.
Thank you. Couldn't do it without the volunteer army, that's for sure.
I want to ask Karina, we had some conversation before we started the panelist conversation about dams and what role dams play in all of this, about resiliency and the health of our environment. So can you go, are dams good? Are dams bad? What are we doing with all of our dams in the state? There's so many of them.
So when we think about rivers, I've talked about giving rivers room to move, and rivers move not just in one dimension, they move in 4 dimensions. So they move, across their floodplain laterally. They also move up and down. They transport sediment, they transport nutrients, they transport fish and other organisms up and downstream. So that's lateral movement in the river, longitudinal movement in the river. And that's where dams come in, is that they block that longitudinal connectivity of the river. So it basically creates a barrier on the river. And behind that barrier, a different ecosystem is created because that sediment and water can't move downstream. So it piles up behind the dam and slows the water down, the temperature warms up, the fish species change from a cold water stream of brook trout to a warm water bass fishery. So you have different species in a lake than you do in a stream. So it really turns into a much more of a lake environment. And of course, this depends on the dam and the extent of the impoundment, but just generally, that's what happens. So you have all this sediment that's building up behind a dam, and if you're managing that dam for flood control, which there are, I think there's a total of 8 dams in the state that are managed for flood control. There's over 1,000 dams in the state, but only 8 of them are managed for flood control. So those are the dams that people are, excavating behind that dam, clearing out that sediment and maintaining the impoundment, the depth of the impoundment to capture water during flood events. But otherwise, all of our dams are not managed for flood control, and that sediment builds up behind them and raises the elevation of the river. So that during a flood event, there is a likelihood of more flooding in urban areas due to these dams or in developed areas. When you remove a dam, you can reconnect that river and reconnect that, restore that connection to the river. and you've reconnected that lateral connectivity and that longitudinal connectivity. So you can restore the connection of the river to then its floodplain, which it couldn't reach before because the dam was there. So, so that's, in short, what dams do for rivers. Yeah.
Do you know the status of the FERC permitting for Great River Hydro and their model going to flow of the river?
I'm going to pass that to Kathy.
Yeah, we are, we've been held up a little bit by the projects downstream who have spent the last 2 years in settlement discussions, the ones in Massachusetts. Those discussions have ended, and so we have been, we feel like we're at the kind of getting close to the end of the process where we could have a final comment period. When FERC says, you know, ready, we're ready, they will do a final comment period. Literally today, my colleague Kate, who now is our river steward on the New Hampshire side, said that there was a notice that came through from FERC asking for additional information from Great River Hydro and giving them, I think, 30 days, and other additional information from the First Light, the projects in Massachusetts, giving them 60 days. So we know now this comment period won't come for at least 2 months and probably more. But in the meantime, most of what Great River Hydro has done is they have put forward in their application a preferred alternative to change their operations to be primarily inflow equals outflow. I wouldn't call it run of river because they, through our negotiations with them, they retained a smaller amount of peaking so that they could have access to certain electricity markets and so that they could maintain their niche in how they respond to the grid and the role that they play in the grid. And just recently, Kate and I have been reaching out to all of the towns adjacent to the river in the project area to try to talk to the select boards or conservation commissions to kind of fill them in on all the details of this operational change, the timeline, and the fact that there will be an opportunity to comment. In our negotiations, we really only talked about the flow. There was a separate set of negotiations that talked about the upgrades to the fish passage for the 3 facilities. But other than that, there have not been any conversations about recreation or what they might do to mitigate for erosion or what they're going to do for cultural resources and in relationship with the tribes. So there's a lot of missing information, and there are, we feel it's pretty urgent for the towns to get ready to comment and to bring up the things that they would like to see in terms of, mitigation for recreation or erosion and what have you, and be ready for that comment period. So we're trying to reach out now to do education, bring everybody back up to speed, and essentially get them started writing comments so that when we have that comment period open, we'll all be ready to go.
Nothing happens fast, does it?
12 years, yeah, we're still going.
Can I ask a different follow-up question? So you said there were 8 flood control dams in Vermont, but there's at least 3 here in Ludlow on the mountain. And there are 5. Well, did you say 5? Yeah. 'Cause I know that the one up high is labeled Dam 5, but I never knew where the other 2 were. Where 3 of them were. And I know at least one, maybe more than one, went over its spillway back in July. I don't know that I've ever seen any of them dredged or much in the way of any means.
And these are good questions. So I know that I can speak to the dams. I work as it relates to dam removal on the Lake Champlain Basin side of the state versus the Connecticut River side of the state. So that's why I pushed to Kathy for anything. Black River is a tributary to the Connecticut. But the flood control dams so like in my area in Montpelier is East Barry, Wrightsville Reservoir, and yeah. I don't think those are flood control dams that you're speaking.
They're not.
They're not.
There,
They are?
no.
Not according to dam safety.
Marie says they are.
The ones, if you drive up Route 100
100.
here, there are 3 small flood control dams that protect Ludlow.
And who manages them?
They are all on Jewel Brook,
And who manages them?
the town. They are town-owned facilities
That were built for flood
that are
control?
built. And NRCS is in the process of planning to refurbish those dams, just so you know.
Right, apples and orange conversation, sorry. To me, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers builds flood control
Right,
dams.
so, yeah, you all are
Yeah.
talking about the
This,
Springfield Dam, that Union Village Dam, Ball Mountain,
North
Townsend,
Heartland, yeah.
North Heartland, those are
Right.
flood control dams that we usually, the scale we usually work on. Ludlow is pretty unique in having flood control dams for the town. So those little recreation areas that go up, those are flood control dams that protect Ludlow.
and they're owned by the town.
They
of
are owned
Ludlow.
by the town.
That is unique. See?
So all I know about them is what I've been reading in the paper, but since we're talking about them, I think there are 5 sites, one of them's a culvert on Bridge Street, I think. And there's a little sign up there, that's on Bridge Street. I live, and I think there's maybe more than one brook comes through them, the Jewel Brook, Sanders Brook, and I think there's
Grant.
another one.
Yeah.
So there's been a number of questions in town about those dams. Dams are built to spill. So there's a certain amount of spilling that's not a problem, I assume. But I think a lot of us, I know I am interested in more information about these dams. I live under 2 of them. I live under Sanders Brook and Jewel Brook. And, what is the state of the dams? What do we have to worry about? What would happen if they failed? What kind of, I left my house late at the July flood, and going downtown felt a lot scarier than staying in my house. But I'd like to know if my house would be washed away, or if the river would just kind of come down and spread out around it. And so there are people who are beginning to, I guess, my question is, there are people beginning to look at these dams. I know my neighborhood was pretty, town was pretty beat up, but we have a neighborhood, we're a mile and a quarter from town, and that neighborhood where Sanders Brook is into Jewel Brook. The water doesn't want to go down Sanders Brook anymore, it wants to come down the road, basically, or through our neighborhood. And so our whole neighborhood wants to act like a floodplain, I think. And it would just be really interesting to walk around with somebody, look at those streams, hear or have a public meeting that says, this is the problem, this isn't the problem, this is what would happen, this is what you can do, this is what the road crew, Sanders Brook doesn't want to go under the 100 anymore, it wants to come down my side of the road, I think. When I go look at it, that's what it looks like it wants to do. It would just be, it seems like it's a town informational meeting that really wants to happen.
Yeah, I would say talk to the town about it, and I know your town manager, I don't know if that person's here or not.
Well, aren't they in the dam inventory?
They should be in the state dam inventory. They are mapped, so, and that means they are inspected. And the state has, and the town has inspection reports on the condition of those dams.
And those reports are a public document?
Yep. And as I said, I know I was at meetings, it was probably a couple years ago now, with the town, with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, because those dams have kind of reached their due date. and everyone's aware that they need to be looked at, they need to be refurbished, so there are already engineering plans being drafted to redo those dams. I haven't been involved since those meetings because it's in NRCS's hands at this point, but your town manager should know where that process is, and as part of that design, they will have looked at if the dam fails, what's going to flood, where's it going to go, all of those issues that you're bringing up. They should have that data from the engineering company that they're working with. So I would ask the town.
Is Westfield Dam part of this? Is Westfield Dam part of those 3 dams?
No. So this is
These are the
Jewelbrook 1, 3. I think the ones that have the reservoirs are 1, 3, and 5.
So West Hill, is that what you're asking about?
Weston Village Dam.
No, West Hill.
Oh, West Hill.
That's Dam 3.
Okay.
Because I can tell you, during Irene, the fire department in Cavendish Village walked house by house and said, if you hear the siren going, you have 10 minutes to clear out because the West Hill Dam has been breached.
That's correct.
And I think that there is a real concern by people in Cavendish as well as Ludlow. If these dams fail, what does that mean for us? Because they basically said you have 10 minutes to clear, and that is something that the whole time we were working in the shelter on July 10th and 11th, we had 1 year waiting to hear if these dams were going to fail. It's a real issue, and I agree with her. We really do need to have some meetings and be prepared because we don't even have a good way of alerting our citizens. But everybody is afraid of that. That is a fear.
It's understandable, and there should be, and I know I worked on it probably 10 years ago, working with the town at that time to create what's called an emergency action plan. And so the dams, and we went through the process with the Regional Planning Commission at the time, and whether or not those got, so an emergency action plan is what are you going to do if the dam's going to go? And it's for your town emergency committee to get the word out, how they're going to notify citizens, how they're going to notify everybody and anybody downstream, how they're going to work with Vermont Emergency Management. All of those pieces are in the emergency action plan. So the town has that should have that for each of the dams. So there's at least, just so you know, that there is a process in place that they have steps to take when this happens. Whether or not those are ever looked at again after they're created, I can't, that again, that's the town emergency process. But they should be in existence. And as I said, the dams are being looked at. Every flood control dam has a capacity. And the Wrightsville Dam up in the Montpelier area almost overtopped in this flood. The Ball Mountain Dam, the Townsend Dam, they all have a capacity. And at some point, one of these floods can breach those.
What I can say is we're working on policy right now at the statewide level on dam safety. So we're working with DEC's Dam Safety Division and others in the state to come up with a policy that basically holds, there's stricter regulations for dam enforcement, so like an increased frequency of inspections for dams that are of a different, like if they're significant or high hazard dams, they would be held to a higher standard for inspections. And we're also working on liability, so improving the liability. So if there's a dam, if a landowner owns a dam, if it's the case of the town of Ludlow, for example, they would be held to a higher standard called strict liability versus just negligence for that dam if it were to fail. So if they didn't maintain, proper records and do their annual inspections or their inspection frequency or have that emergency action plan. So those are things that like we're working to have a higher level of safety for dams in the state. Additionally, we're also working, right now there's a split jurisdiction at the state level of dams. So there's dams that are managed by Dam Safety and dams that are managed by the Public Utilities Commission. And we're trying, that's inefficient in a lot of ways, so we're trying to transfer that jurisdiction over so that just Dam Safety, who has engineers and has the training, will be responsible for managing those dams that are, yeah.
I will say that the current budget has additional funding for more staff, more dam engineers, safety, and like you said, the high hazard dams, I think there's 8 on the list, if I remember right.
I think that sounds right. Yep, and then there's significant hazard. Yep. Yeah.
Which over the grand scheme of things isn't a lot unless you happen to live below one of them.
Right. And in addition, there's part of the legislation is about funding and how there's a lot of dams that were damaged in this flood. I think of the 390 rapid inspections that Dam Safety did, over 60% of the dams were damaged. So there's a lot of damage that happened. And so then it's repair and like, do we set up a pot of funds for repairing these dams? And is that a grant or a loan, and would we have to repay it if they repair it, then we want to show them that they can truly maintain it and have the money to maintain it and keep up with it. But if they want to remove it because they don't need it anymore, then we want to give that to them in a grant because they would be reconnecting the river and providing all these other benefits.
And fixing dams is incredibly expensive.
Incredibly expensive, and
there's $13 million in the budget this year as a down payment to fix the waterway dam.
Exactly.
That's only a fraction of what it's going to cost.
Exactly.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Oh. Yeah.
So, talk about breach to me means the dam has failed, not top of the spillway, or are you using that term the same way?
Yeah, overtopping is, the dam has reached its capacity and it's using the spillway.
So that's still breaching?
That's,
No, that's not
No.
a breach.
I think a breach would be a partial break, a partial
failure.
opening, where.
Because, I don't think any of these dams breached or seemed like they did, but I know at least Dam 5 went over its spillway. I don't know if Dam 3, the West Hill Dam went over its spillway. Dam 5 definitely, which was interesting because that watershed above that is pretty much all Okemo State Forest, so there wasn't like a lot of displacement from, as opposed to Dam 3, the brook that feeds that, it goes through Westwood's, the edge of Westwood's condos, and it goes through Trailside. So there's a lot of impervious surface where there was never, that was mostly built in the 70s and 80s, and there was never any water retention systems. It was built before we were asked, with these belts, like we were talking about the 3-acre rule, right? There's no water retention that was put for most of the condominium developments that are on Okemo to retain any of the water that's being displaced from those developments.
I was just going to add something in there, Margot, or whomever would like to. I just had an opportunity today to listen to the November 6th Select Board meeting for Ludlow, and they addressed, I think it was in the last half of it, so you can fast forward, they addressed the dam's recent inspection and estimates and safety levels, and they also addressed emergency communications and a new position, a new person. They mentioned Angela Kissel by name as networking with this person. So if you have time, I can send you the link, but Okemo TV filmed that. So if you get a chance to hop on and find that from November 6th, I think it's in the last half of it.
Hey, Kelly, did the holding ponds have any impact?
I'm sorry, did the what?
The holding ponds on Okemo?
The holding?
Ponds used for making snow.
I don't know. I just know what I saw in terms of the volume that came down in Okemo Brook. And I wasn't in town on the 10th. I didn't get into town until the Saturday, but I saw the footage, I saw the photos, and that little tiny itty-bitty brook is one of the ones that we sample. And so there are times when it's so small, the flow is so low in the summertime that she has a hard time finding a good hole to put her little cup in to get a sample. And to see the volume that came down and the force with which it came down, it's extremely humbling. So I don't know yet what failed up there. I don't know what could be done uphill, upstream, to try to keep some of that water from entering Okemo Brook in the first place. But looking at development, looking at impervious surfaces, and I'm not saying no development or no new development. I'm saying let's have some storm savvy development, some low impact development, help water to soak in where it can, spread out where it can, and keep it out of the brooks where we can. The higher up, the better.
There is, I was just looking online on our dam inventory, and there is some information that if you give me your email, I can forward to you. There's a dam report, and I'm sure we have dam inventory reports. They're from 2021. So, I mean, that's all publicly available information that we can help you find or put you in contact with the right people to get.
All right, I'm gonna pivot to David. I want to make sure David's included in this as well. I have a two-parter for you, David, and hopefully you can help us kind of wrap up it as well. First part is addressing watershed health and safeguarding fish populations. What are ways that the angling community has been involved in this work, and what work is your chapter doing? And then after you answer that question, if you can also talk a little bit about what policies we're looking at to improve our state when it comes to flood and climate resiliency.
Okay. The state of Vermont, through DEC and in conjunction with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, do a stream assessment on a 5-year rotation, and I think that's still the timing. We just don't have the staff to do the assessment of all our streams all the time. So they bite off pieces of our 14 major inland watersheds and do assessments. They assess the streams for macroinvertebrate life and a bunch of other parameters that define healthy water: dissolved oxygen, embedded stream bottom, temperature, all kinds of things. And then Fish and Wildlife does the actual fish count. They'll do electric shocking, and they'll do it either in conjunction with DEC or volunteer groups like Trout Unlimited. And in fact, our chapter just had Deschler.
Jim.
To our board meeting to explain. They've just recently done our area of the state, and we had them there to explain what they had found. In terms of flooding, by the way, the bottom line is we got some really healthy streams out there. We really and truly do, and they are worth protecting. On to flooding. Not everything that is a problem with flooding is a recent occurrence of human activity. According to stream engineers, 85% of our streams have been modified, and mostly for things like logging. Nothing, you don't want a curvy stream if you want to be floating logs. You want to straighten that puppy out and move them right down river, and that's in a natural situation. Most of us have heard the bromide that Vermont was 80% cleared land about 1850, 1860, and it's now the opposite, it's 20% cleared land. Well, 80% cleared lands meant that we didn't have a forest, and that our mountains were washing down into our rivers, and our rivers are still recovering from that. So some of what you hear discussed about things that you need to do for rivers in order to prevent flooding, we can thank our forefathers for having set us up for some of the problems that we're dealing with. So it is truly wonderful that stream geomorphology has come as far as it has in the last 25 years. And for me, that I was here to experience it in terms of really understanding what our rivers need in order to be healthful, helpful, and part of our state. Hopefully I got to what you wanted. I've been wanting to talk about that for a while.
Karina, anything to add on the policy front?
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
So my understanding is that woody debris in the streams is a good thing.
Yep.
We had about a 1 mile section of that brook that goes across the property. In 2020, we had a microburst go through and a bunch of trees came down and were in the stream. And last summer, somebody from Fish and Wildlife came out and did a trout study, determined how much trout were in there, and they were explaining to me.
Electroshocking, walking down the stream. Yeah.
Right. So they were explaining how great this woody debris in the stream is. It, during floods, it helps slow the water down, so it doesn't, go rushing through. And we went down during the flood and we were looking at this, and it looked like really good. And I thought, oh, this, it's working the way it's supposed to. And then a week later, somebody came in and cleared the whole stream out. And now it's a nice raceway.
Huh.
So
I would have tackled whoever it was that tried to clear the stream out, I'll tell you that. Yeah, in fact, our chapter, one of the areas in Windham County that has a very recent history of intense logging is the Deerfield River watershed. And we've actually done 2 what are called, and you scientific types, hold on to your seat, chop and drops, where we put wood in the water, strategically placed wood in the water in order to return that sort of messy, go here, go there kind of current flows, pools, riffles that you get when you have natural wood in the water.
So I would assume the town managers should be managing this. How do we get them educated so that they, don't...
Call Marie. Someone's in your stream chopping down trees. Marie wants to know.
Yeah.
Stuff to clean and treat that.
No, seriously, they shouldn't be doing it. I don't know anybody within the state that would issue a permit for that kind of work at this point.
The times that we have river engineers, which are part of Shannon's program, that will look at those situations. And, if it's, 100 feet up from a culvert, they would allow the town to take those out because we don't want them in the next flood to block the culvert and flood the road. But anytime that happens, the river engineer should have eyes on it and determine whether or not that should come out or that shouldn't come out.
Yeah, so there's a bridge on 106 that's maybe a mile downstream. So you're saying that if it was with...
The steel bridge or the covered bridge?
It's like a concrete, formed. I mean, it doesn't... You can drive over it and not realize.
Do you think some of the trees...
I know which one you're talking about. I live in Reading.
But it just seems like it, the town managers, whoever, they have a bunch of different contractors come in. One person works on one road, somebody else works on somebody else's road and whatever. But that just, like all of the streams are cleared out.
Yeah, it should not be.
Yeah, I would say that there has been a lot of discussion about what can and cannot be removed from streams. And after Irene, actually, the state jurisdiction changed so that a certain amount of wood removal does come under the stream alteration engineer's jurisdiction. So they have been discussing with communities like what can and cannot be removed under that jurisdiction. So I can't speak to your situation in particular, but I can tell you who to call to see if that was an authorized removal.
It's like on a conflict now.
Well, it might prevent it from happening again, in the future. Because the wood will hopefully accumulate again.
But maybe what you're asking partly, I've wondered also, after the July flood, a lot of towns around here sent out their big equipment, and Ludlow, was in the bottom of the Jewel Brook. The bulldozers were in there making a nice channel to go straight through the river. And I just, every time I saw the big equipment, I wondered who's talking to the road crews about, how does that work? And because those ideas about what should be cleaned up or where to put all the runoffs, for the runoffs a lot of what was in our stream was gravel out of people's driveways that are going straight down to the roads, and they're just, I don't know, just who watches that stuff about gravel driveways going down to roads, and who cleans up what rivers, and the road crews.
Yeah, that's
So there's
stream
so there's stream alteration permits, and there are certain provisions for emergencies where if, there's a river that has been rerouted and it's causing harm, and danger to somebody's property, that certain emergency measures can be completed, and those need to be reported within a certain amount of time. So there's certain things that can be done in emergency situations without a permit. So, some of that might have happened during the flood. I wouldn't be surprised if Ludlow had some of that happening for good reason. And as far as educating, town folks in general, after Irene, we created a program called the Rivers and Roads Training Program, and it's offered to all of the people, the road crews throughout Vermont, and we've had tremendous success with that. We've had a lot of people come through. It's a 3-day intensive training where people learn about stream function and what should and shouldn't happen, what culvert should look like, why we want to leave wood in the stream in certain situations and take it out in others, why we don't want berms along rivers, and why we want them to flood and spread out and move. Because we see a lot of things like people putting things back the way they were just because that's the way it's always been. And we want to prevent that from happening if it's not what's best for the resource and it's not protecting somebody's property. For example, we see a lot of places where, our rivers created all of our valley bottoms. The rivers eroded back and forth over geologic time and created these valleys. And oftentimes there's development and roads that, are somewhere in there. And so rivers have been relocated in a lot of cases. Like David was talking about, a lot of our rivers have been manipulated over time, and we've kind of inherited this, unstable situation, unstable relationship with our rivers because they're not functioning in the way that they should be. They're not flooding where they should be. They're not depositing sediment where they should be. They're kind of we call it the fire hose effect, where they're just kind of fast, and they're not spreading out and slowing down. So anyway, sometimes we'll find there's a road here and the river's over here against the valley, and there's a berm against the river. And there's a whole field between the road and the river, but the berm's always been there, and so the road crew, they put the road back and they put the berm back, right on top of the river. But, if you're trying to protect the road, the berm could be up against the road, and that could allow that whole field to flood, which would help take the flood water and the sediment off of the downstream community. So, we're trying to educate people slowly but surely in alternative ways to put things back and still protect your infrastructure, but create more space for the resource. So that doesn't get to gravel, coming off of people's driveways, getting in rivers, and maybe Marie can speak to that because that's more your area of expertise. But we are trying to educate, as many people as we can, who are the people that actually end up doing the work after the flood, because those are the people who we need to get to. It's offered.
And in that vein, I would encourage you to encourage your town to send the road crew to these trainings. I mean, it's voluntary, but it's in everyone's best interest, as you're saying, that they know what to do. And, the state doesn't have jurisdiction over that level of road crew management, but
Marie?
you can.
Yeah, it
encourage
was
your town to do
mandatory
that.
for state personnel to go through the process, and then towns, it was volunteer, and also privates. private operators, guys who just own one big yellow machine are eligible to go and be trained on how to operate in a river-friendly manner.
Where do we find those courses?
A&R website, I would imagine.
I'm sure there's
It's still
information on the
there.
A&R website.
If you just Google Rivers and Roads Training Vermont, I think you'll get it.
Yeah, I think you would get it. And I'm going to toot my own horn. I was in the legislature after Irene, and we worked very hard, very long, 4 years, the administration, the legislature, trying to respond to what we learned in terms of Irene. And one of the best ideas that came out of it was the Institute for Operating in a Stream with heavy power equipment and the value of messy streams.
Marie or David, do private contractors who enroll in that and take that course, do they come out with any kind of a certificate? Do they end up on a list where towns can say, you know what, we need work done, but let's get one of these people who knows that information? Can they get some kind of certificate?
I have no idea. I have no idea. That's a great idea.
Who else needs to be encouraged about that?
I can ask Steve. So it's run by,
Gotcha.
I think that there is a certificate.
I'm not sure, Stacy Power.
Yeah, there is a certificate that's issued once you complete the course.
Yeah, I think
And I know that I've talked with guys that have gone through it. They liked it. They had fun.
Yeah, people actually really enjoy it. They go out and shock the fish, so they get to go out with the, the Fish and Wildlife, and that's always like a
That's
big
so
hit.
cool to do.
So part of it's in the field, where you actually go out and look at rivers and learn like how they function
Do you
and
have
where the
to own a
fish
yellow
live.
machine to do that? 'Cause
No, Kelly, you know.
Everybody should go through
Anybody
that.
should go to it.
Okay, I'm just
Paul-
being conscious of time. I don't want to cut everyone off, and happy to like have conversations after, but I want to recognize the time, and we've already gone over. I do want to just let you know of some of the policies that are on the table for this legislative session that we have going, in addition to the dam safety bill that we talked about, is H29, which is our river corridor bill. So this is that concept of giving rivers the room they need to move. Right now, we only have river corridor protection at the Act 250 level, and for towns that have adopted the flood hazard piece, but we basically want river corridor protection throughout the state to give those rivers the room to move. And that doesn't mean that towns that are already built within the floodplain have to move, but it does mean that when we can find opportunities to not develop in the floodplain, that we need to do so and figure out alternative places. So the river corridor bill, the wetlands bill, which is H30, and that is recognizing the impact of wetlands based on when it was historically sheep farms and there were no forests, and wetlands have been protected in the state for a long time. So we've lost what's estimated to be 35% of our wetlands. So the wetlands bill proposes to further protect wetlands at a 2-to-1 ratio. So a no net loss of wetlands is what we have now, but we would like a net gain of wetlands because we need those wetlands to keep our rivers clean. And so we're working on that bill, and that also includes more reporting for wetlands. So what annually, like how much wetlands are we impacting, what are we losing? So that we have a more robust data set of tracking our wetlands, as well as mapping. And then riparian buffers, we have a riparian buffer study group under H80. So there's a study group that will come up with how do we protect not only the river corridor, but that vegetation, that woody vegetation along our stream, because we need that to filter water and take up water during these storm events. So that's the policy part. And thank you all, and sorry to cut it short, but.
Yes, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for coming and joining the conversation.
Thank you.